Today on the Chairman's Corner, the 2017 tax assessment notices. You spoke and the Fulton County Board of Commissioners listened. So what's next? My guest today is Fulton's Chief Appraiser, Dwight Robinson. He'll tell us what you need to know if you want to appeal. I'm Fulton County Chairman John Eves, and you're on the Chairman's Corner. Increases in inaccuracies with the 2017 Fulton County assessment notices caused hundreds of property owners to demand relief. Well, that is exactly what residents received thanks to the unanimous vote by the Fulton Commissioners to set the 2017 values at 2016 levels. So how did we get here and what's next? Dwight Robinson is the Fulton County's Chief Appraiser, and he has the answers. Welcome, Mr. Dwight Robinson, to the Chairman's Corner.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit, how did we get to this place? And maybe you can even start out by telling folks what your role is as the Chief Appraiser in the Tax Assessment Office, the Tax Assessor's Office, that is.
I'm pretty much the Chief Administrator in the Tax Assessor's Office. I make sure that the Tax Assessor's Office runs smoothly, that values go out accurately and on time.
So this is something you do on an annual basis, and this is a charge that each county in the state of Georgia has.
Yes, but it's not necessarily on an annual basis, but it should be on an annual basis.
So you took the job back in September or so of 2016, and you had this big task ahead. So what were some of the steps that led to the process of doing the tax assessment notices that came out in May?
Well, when I got the job in September, I did not realize how far behind residential assessments were, how far behind versus the market. So in December, I got correspondence from the Department of Audits that showed our 2016 tax digest to be in jeopardy of not meeting the level of assessment standards. That started me on my road to making sure that those mistakes were not repeated in 2017.
So let's do a little bit of Tax Assessment 101.
Mm-hmm.
So you determined that you're going to send the notices out, which is you're responsible for doing.
Mm-hmm.
So educate the public a little bit about your relationship with the Tax Commissioner's Office and why the tax assessment is so important in the process.
Well, it's a simple formula, really. The Board of Commissioners decide what their budget priorities are. Mm-hmm. My job is to make sure that values are fair and equitable. And the Board of Commissioners also set a millage rate that when multiplied by the digest values, it produces the funds necessary to fund the budget. The tax commissioner, he collects the money based on the taxes that are assessed. He is a tax collector.
Right. And I think the other thing that I've learned through this whole process, and many of our listeners have learned, is that we also collect taxes on other jurisdictions within Fulton County.
Yes. There are 15 municipalities and 2 school boards that also form the basis of the taxes that the citizens pay.
Mm-hmm. And so tell a little bit about the tax assessment process. What does your staff do in terms of being able to send out these notices?
The key is to take a look at the sales that have occurred. We use sales to determine fair market value. Sales determine what the market is. And so for 2017, we took a look at almost 20,000 sales. And based on those 20,000 sales, we determined what values ought to be. And that's what we did.
And this was no small task. I mean, so again, you sent out notices, your office sent out notices. So roughly how many notices went out to residential and commercial property owners?
I would estimate close to 340,000 notices.
Wow, so that's quite a bit.
That's a lot. That's the most in the state.
And they went out the end of May-ish?
Yes.
And so you were doing your job, in fairness to you, and you were trying to get up to close to market value as possible. But there was sticker shock. And so, in other words, some folks were not prepared to get the tax assessment notices in terms of the increase in values. Can you elaborate a little bit in terms of what that looked like? There were some property owners whose values went up, some stayed the same, and a few went down. So can you break down the numbers a little bit on that?
Yes, we had 61,000 property owners whose values went up by more than 50%. Put another way, we thought that their values over the years had not been keeping up with the market, and we really had no choice but to bring those values up to reflect what was happening in the marketplace. We had close to 14,000 whose values went down, and another probably about 41,000 who remained the same. So all told, close to 60% of all Fulton County taxpayers received values that were either lower or did not exceed 13% increase.
So you've been in your position for less than a year, but you've also been in the tax assessor's office for
25 years.
25. So you're certainly a seasoned professional. Is this the first time that we've experienced this situation in terms of the potential big spike or increase in terms of property values?
Actually, no.
Okay.
Back in 1991, Fulton County had not done a reappraisal, a comprehensive reappraisal, for over 25 years. So we brought in an outside company to do the comprehensive reappraisal, and the result was pretty much the same. As a matter of fact, it was actually worse back in 91 than what it is today. Those values were caught up in court for close to 2 years before we were allowed to implement them. So no, this is not my first go-around.
Okay, so you got some training by fire.
Yes, I did.
But of course, you weren't the chief appraiser at the time.
No.
So, you know, in fairness to you, you were just doing your job. But for myself as chairman of Fulton County government and the other commissioners, we are elected, and we also responsible for listening to our constituents. So we went out, we held town hall meetings. You were so gracious with your time. I hosted 3. You were there with me. You answered the tough questions. We heard as commissioners, and then we made a decision to freeze the assessment at most of the assessments for residential at last year's values, 2016 values. So give us a sense of what's going on right now. This is no small feat that you and others are doing in terms of the recalibration process of sending out new notices later this summer.
Yes, we fully intend to have notices on the street first week in August. We're targeting August 4th, as a matter of fact, to send out notices. And you're correct, it was no small feat. Things had to be recalibrated, recoded, and everything is now on track. We're actually a little bit ahead of schedule in getting those new notices out on the street. Taxpayers, when they get those notices, will have a new 45-day window to appeal if they still think that their value is incorrect.
And so I think it's important that what you mentioned about the appeal process. What about those property owners whose properties actually decrease in value? Is appealing an option for them?
It most definitely is.
Okay.
If you think that your revised 2017 values are still unfair, then by all means, the process calls for you to appeal if you think that you are being treated unfairly.
Well, I think the other thing is I think people need to understand that this is part of your job. This is part of one of the functions of your office in terms of the appraisal process. We do provide an opportunity for property owners who feel that there has been a mistake to go through an appeal process. But so it's something you're supposed to do, and then there's a sort of an appeal process that's in place for people who are concerned or want to challenge the assessment. But let's talk a little bit about going forward, or what is in the toolbox right now in terms of things that property owners can apply for, pursue in terms of exemptions that can reduce the the assessment amount, which is a basis for the tax billing. So can you educate the public a little bit about the homestead exemptions that are available to them?
Yeah, we have several homestead exemptions. The most popular one, of course, is your basic homestead exemption that every property owner who owns and occupies their residence is entitled to. But we also have exemptions for senior citizens over 65, over 70, for disabled citizens. We have of course, the CPI exemption, which is only applied to Fulton County and Sandy Springs, but that has proved very popular. And what that does, it limits the amount of increase to 3% or the consumer price index, whichever is lower. It's very popular, and we have over 170,000 of our residents taking advantage of that. You have to apply for these exemptions, however, before April 1st. So for those who have not applied for 2017, there's always 2018.
Well, Dwight, this is some great information. As I've gone out with the public, they certainly have been educated. So this is just part one. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back in a few minutes and talk about the 2017 tax assessment notices and other details or next steps. So stay with us. We'll be right back with the Chairman's Corner. We've been talking with Fulton's Chief Appraiser, Dwight Robinson, about the 2017 tax assessment notices. So we already talked about how we got here. Now, let's talk about what happens next and what your office, Dwight, will be facing next year. So again, the notices went out the end of May. They're now null and void.
Correct.
The tax appeal deadline of July the 10th is now null and void. So they will be receiving, residents will be receiving tax notices on August the 4th.
Correct.
And then there will be an appeal process, so appeal deadline as well.
Yes.
So, and that will be?
September 18th.
So all residents, they still have a right to appeal, and that's by law.
Yes, they will have a new 45-day window in which to appeal if they still think that their value is incorrect.
So educate a little bit the public. What will they see on this tax assessment notice?
The tax assessment notice is prescribed by law. It has three parts. The first part, your name, address, things like that, a little bit of information about the notice. The second part is your old value and your new value along with your assessment. And then the third part is where we get to estimate your taxes. This is always a tricky situation.
So it's not a bill, it's just an estimate.
It's just an estimate.
Mm-hmm. So they have until September 18th, you said, in terms of the appeal deadline. And then when should they reasonably expect the tax commissioner's tax bill?
Well, I hate speaking for the tax commissioner, but the process is once the 45 days appeal period is up, then the tax commissioner goes to work preparing his bills. Why he has to wait until the 45-day period is up? Some people will elect to pay at 100%. Some people will elect to pay at 85%. It's automatic that when you appeal, you get to pay at a lesser value until your appeal is resolved. So the tax commissioner always waits until after that 45-day period is up to start his billing process.
Right. And so it's a reasonable expectation, of course, that it'll be happening sometime in the hopefully early part of the fall.
Yes.
And then there's an expectation that taxpayers will pay their bill ideally by the end of the year.
Correct. Correct.
And, so we also need to let folks know that the tax bill does not only support Fulton County government, but it supports other governments as well. I think you touched on that a little bit earlier, but if you can just elaborate a little bit more.
Yes, the tax bill that you get will support not only Fulton County, but it will support the 15 municipalities and the 2 school boards. Mm-hmm. Now, our tax commissioner, the Fulton County tax commissioner, doesn't collect taxes for all jurisdictions, but for those jurisdictions that he collects for, he will, of course, send bills that reflect what the taxes are on those separate jurisdictions.
Now, let's look a little bit ahead to next year. We certainly have learned. You've done your job, even though we as elected officials, we felt that there were some things that could be changed, could be done better. We always want to improve our product, improve our process. What are some things that you can recommend that the property owner can do in terms of exhausting all possibilities of home exemptions? You mentioned this earlier, I believe, in terms of the various exemptions that are out there. Can you elaborate on what is there and what people should apply for?
Well, it depends on their circumstance. It depends on their age. Are they disabled? Are they over 65? Are they over 70? They need to educate themselves, and we need to help them to show them exactly what it is they may qualify for. Mm-hmm. So we're hoping this whole episode, what it has brought to light in some respects, is the lack of knowledge that our taxpayers have about things that are out there that could be of benefit to them. We certainly encourage them to try and learn more, and it's our intention going forward to put out as much information as we can to assist them in this process.
Well, I agree with you, Mr. Robertson. I think it's been a learning process for all of us. And, not only are there senior exemptions that perhaps people aren't taking advantage of, there may be some veterans. I didn't realize veterans, disabled folks. So there are quite a few exemptions. Are there 30, 40 or more of them that are out there?
There are so many. I can't give you an exact figure now, but there are a lot of exemptions out there which people may qualify for, and they absolutely do not know it.
And I think there's an internal process going on right now to kind of put some of these many exemptions into some broad categories, whether it's seniors or people on fixed income or folks who might be disabled or veterans, put them in some broad categories so it's easier to communicate to folks what exemptions are out there.
And certainly one of the things that we learned from the many town hall meetings is the need for us to be more transparent. It not only helps us, but it helps the public.
I think the other thing that I think is a little bit of a misconception or limited information on is about the tax appeal process. So you stated already, anyone has a right to appeal. So kind of walk us through the various scenarios, the various options that are available for people who choose to go through the appeal process.
Actually, there are 4 reasons why you can appeal your property. You can appeal your property because you think that the value we've placed on your property, you could never sell your property for that amount of money. Mm-hmm. You can appeal because you think that your value lacks uniformity. Mm-hmm. In other words, when you compare your value to other similar parcels, yours is higher, theirs lower. You can appeal as to taxability. This doesn't apply to most of the taxpayers, simply because they're not churches, they're not hospitals, they're not institutes of public charity. Those are some of the folks who would be eligible to appeal based on taxability. Mm-hmm. And finally, you can appeal because your homestead exemption was denied. Mm-hmm. So those are the 4 reasons that a taxpayer can avail themselves of.
So you can't appeal because you lost a job or got a promotion or whatever like that?
Certainly you can appeal, but we would not recognize it.
So once a person appeals, there are several options, whether it's your department assessing or evaluating, and then there's a Board of Equalization. So kind of just walk through the 2 or 3 steps or options that are available.
Yes, there are actually 3 levels.
Okay.
Your first level is that you appeal to the Board of Assessors. We take a look at your appeal, we assess it, and then we make a decision. If you don't like our decision, you have that second level, which is the Boards of Equalization, the hearing officer, or arbitration. If you're still not satisfied, then you go to Superior Court. But before you go to Superior Court, there's a new wrinkle in the law that says we have to schedule a settlement conference.
Okay.
So there are many opportunities for you to be treated fairly once you appeal that value.
So once a person starts a process of appeal, is their value or assessment stayed or fixed, frozen until resolution, or how does it work?
Well, when you file your appeal, you really should tell us whether you want to pay on 100% or 85% of value.
Okay.
Whatever you decide, let's say you decide to pay on 85% of your value, you pay on that amount, you will be sent a temporary bill.
Right.
And you pay that amount until your appeal is resolved. If it's resolved lower, then of course it has to be resolved below that 85% for you to get a refund. If not, then a final bill, a final additional bill will be sent to you.
Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about next year.
Okay.
I tell you, in the midst of these town hall meetings, particularly ones that you and I have been a part of, as well as some of the other commissioners, there certainly has been a lot of controversy, a lot of consternation, et cetera. But you have been a calm voice in the middle of a storm, and I commend you on your professionalism and your personal demeanor. But let's talk a little bit about next year. I mean, we all have learned from this process. Any ideas, suggestions on how we can do things a little bit better next year so that it's not as contentious in 2018?
Well, I touched on it earlier. We really do need to be more transparent. And I think with our plans to enhance communications, especially via our website, taxpayers should be kept abreast of where their values are headed. Most taxpayers know a pretty good idea of what they could sell their property for. Our goal is to come in as close to that value as we can. With proposed legislation on the horizon, I'm hoping that taxpayers will see a chance to get relief on the amount of taxes they pay, because really there is very little that we can do as tax assessors to manipulate value. The value is the value.
Right. And you mentioned one of the other potential remedies in terms of working with the state, for example. I certainly will be working with the state to try to get some recommendations through and become law. But again, I want to thank you for what you've done. You're doing your job, and nobody's perfect, no operation is perfect, but you certainly have been out front and taking it like a true professional. So on behalf of the Board of Commissioners and all of our citizens, I want to thank you for what you're doing, have done, and more importantly, what you plan to do going forward in terms of making the tax assessment process even better for our constituency. So thank you so much for being here as well, and I look forward to our continued partnership.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. You demanded an answer to those sky-high assessments. We listened, and we got it done. But we're not finished. We are actively working to come up with some long-term solutions in everyone's best interest. We don't want seniors and vulnerable citizens choosing between taxes and medicine. But at the same time, we do need to meet the needs of our municipalities and schools. At Fulton County, we are committed to keeping you informed every step of the way in this process. That's all the time that we have today. Please connect with me online on Facebook and Twitter, and let's keep the social door of communication wide open. I'm your Fulton County Chairman, John Eves, and we will see you next time on the Chairman's Corner.